Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives, and today we're going to be continuing our discussion on the Gwenverse miniseries as we take a look at Spider-Gwen, Gwenverse number 3. So, last time on Gwenverse. So, as Spider-Gwen continued gathering other versions of herself from across time, she eventually wound up adding two more Gwens to the arsenal, specifically a Captain America Gwen and a Wolverine Gwen. As both Gwens, it turns out, were in the same relative time period, with the Thor Gwen actually joining Gwen's side because, well, Gwen showed her the wonders of modern technology, such as photography. However, as Gwen as Gwen tried recruiting both Gwens, essentially they kind of got into some turbulence. For one thing, Cap Gwen and Wolverine Gwen only became aware of each other's existence after Wolverine Gwen posed for some rather explicit photos for a pinup calendar pretending to be her Captain America counterpart. And when Captain America Gwen tried doing something about it, Wolverine got into a tussle because, well, she wanted to call her out and she wanted to duke it and she wanted to fight her because she was a little disgusted by her essentially turning herself into a superhero while Wolverine Gwen was experimented on. However, ultimately things kind of came to a head as all four Gwens wound up crossing paths with two members of the Terminal Six, specifically Fossil and Roachman. But thankfully, with the combined efforts of both Gwens, both supervillains were taken down, but ultimately they did cause quite a bit of ruckus, and they wound up leaving to go back to Loom World. And to make matters worse, it turns out in the battle Wolverine Gwen kind of sort of wound up injuring someone, as the battle had taken place at a party, and hiding in a cabinet at the party were two kids, both of them being a young Howard Stark and a young Norman Osborn, and sadly Norman got injured when Wolverine Gwen tried stabbing Roachman, which wound up injuring Norman himself and sent him to the hospital. And as such, the last comic ended with the young Howard Stark promising his best friend that one day he would make him a true suit of armor to protect him, as, well, Norman's costume at the time was a knight costume. So either way, that's where the last comic ended. And today's comic actually begins as the Gwens are arguing with each other over what the next best course of action is to, fix all of this, with Cap Gwen thinking maybe they could go into the future and fix all this, Wolverine Gwen thinking it's stupid, Thor Gwen thinking that, hey, she needs worship, she's a god after all, while Spider-Gwen just thinks they all need to shut their pie holes because she's tired of hearing them argue and bicker like children. As such, after throwing them aside, after getting everyone to be quiet, she talks to Spider-Zero and wants to know exactly where the next thread is so they can find her next template. And sure enough, despite the fact that Gwen's thread is starting to get a little bit more tangled up, basically, they are able to discover where the next thread is. Specifically, it's in the 80s, and so Gwen decides that, well, she'll go at it alone. Although she quickly changes her mind as before she leaves, Wolverine Gwen kind of asks an obvious question. If Gwen is trying to restore her timeline, her Earth to its proper time, or essentially restore her reality to what it once was, then why is she just letting the other Gwens live? After all, wouldn't it be a lot more prudent if she just, killed the other Gwens, which Wolverine Gwen says that she would do if she were in her position? Which, rather than leading to some honestly good character development, well, instead just results in Gwen saying, you know what, I'm just not leaving you alone with Spider-Zero, you come with me, and she pretty much tells the other Gwens to come too, because she doesn't want to be alone with Wolverine Gwen either. So all four Gwens travel to Earth 65's 80s, and it turns out they actually arrive in I think Vegas. I think Vegas. Hold on, let me check. Okay, yeah, they're at Vegas. They end up in Vegas, and they end up in front of a big convention center where something called Transmode is going on. At first, Gwen thinks they'll stick out like sore thumbs because they're all wearing superhero costumes, so everyone's gonna probably notice them. But it turns out, well, everyone thinks they look cool, and they unintentionally end up creating the concept of cosplay. So yeah, that's neat. But either way, yeah, this allows them to kind of blend in, but it's still a matter of finding this time's Gwen Stacy. And sure enough, they do find it, as when looking through flyers, Spider-Gwen ends up discovering who the Gwen of this timeline is. She's Howard Stark's adopted daughter. Yep, it turns out that this version of Gwen is actually called Tony Stacy, and it's not spelled Tony with a Y, it's spelled with an I. And basically, she's the one that they're there for. And here's another little thing. Basically, it turns out that because of all the alterations to time, we're kind of seeing where certain threads end up leading. As something I didn't really mention because it wasn't important, as in issue 1 of Spider-Gwen Gwenverse, you could see science for a company called Oztech, spelled OSS. And as Gwen's looking at this flyer, she's able to figure out exactly what the OSS stands for. It's supposed to stand for Osborn, Stark, and Stacy. And yeah, basically Norman Osborn, Howard Stark, and Tony Stacy wound up essentially working together to try and build up the company. And basically the reason why they're at Transmode is because they're here to show off a new piece of technology. As such, the Gwens end up just hauling into the convention center and decide they need to at least figure out where this presentation is so they can probably find that Gwen and, get her into the fold, so to speak. In the meantime, though, back at the end of time, we end up getting some exposition from Finale as she finally starts talking to Irma about her history and why she became Finale. And sure enough, it's actually kind of a personal one. Basically, Finale's mother was a writer, an artist, so to speak. Basically, she was very talented, but because of her chosen profession, she didn't really earn a lot of money. And while she was able to do enough to, keep a roof over her and her daughter's heads, well, again, she wasn't really considered a big name, so to speak. However, Finale still loved her mom, and her mom loved her, and so she was able to still kind of live with that. And on top of that, Finale herself could find other ways to get past the whole life of poverty thing. Because, well, she had superpowers. Specifically, she had the power to time slip, so to speak, allowing her to essentially allowing her to view the future. And it wasn't just one future. She could see every possible future, every reality, every alternate timeline. Basically, if it was even on the record at all as a potential future, she could view it. And something that she noticed when looking into each of these potential futures was that, well, normal people like her mom tended to be forgotten, washed off, as in all of these futures there was no mention of what her mom did or what her accomplishments were. But she sure saw a hell of a lot of superheroes. Basically, no matter the timeline, no matter the reality, superheroes would always be at the forefront of everything, and they're the people that everyone remembered. And Finale, well, she wanted a bite of that. As she got older, she found ways to use her future vision to essentially kind of peek into different timelines and figure out the best course of action to essentially actualize them. Essentially, her powers are garnets from Steven Universe, whatever. My point is this: she basically used her powers to figure out the best course of action to, hype herself up. She was able to know the right routes to take to get more money. She became an influencer to garner more attention, and just more and more she kept building herself up a bit more at a time until she eventually became the artist that she is today. Unfortunately, though, as well, one day, while she was, peeking into an alternate timeline and looking at the Ghost Rider 3000, duking it out with Dr. Cephalopod, she wound up learning that her mother died, specifically having a stroke. As such, after this happened, basically, Finale kind of lost it a little, as she managed to pull Dr. Cephalopod out of his time before it was consumed by the end of time, and so she basically working with him, she decided that she didn't want to end up lost and forgotten like her mom. And so, knowing the end of time was coming one day, she wanted to ensure that, well, she would be remembered. Hold on one second. Sorry, I was checking a notification. But yeah, she just wanted to make sure that she was remembered. And so she and Dr. Cephalopod wound up working together to, well, build a finalizer because, well, her plan was that when the end of time consumed everything and a new reality spawned in its wake, well, she would be at the center of all of it. And so, which is why which fed back into the whole reincarnating across time, and so to speak. However, Irma, who she's been expositing all this to, pretty much just reads her the riot act and screams at her that what does it matter? Look what you did to all my friends. Look at them. Where's their place in all this stuff? Why did they have to die at all? At which point, Finale just drops Irma and pretty much just tells her that they didn't matter. They weren't important. They weren't focus. They didn't get all the focus. They didn't get all the focus, and they're just going to end up being forgotten anyway. So yeah, Finale is just kind of a bitch. In the meantime, though, we cut back to the 80s on Earth 65 as we see two more members of the Terminal 6 arrive to try and kill that Times Gwen. Gwen. In this case, the villains that we see here are a supervillain called Black 13, who is meant to be like an alternate version of Black Cat, and the Glam Goblin, a psychiatrist who basically had Norman Osborn as one of his patients, got inspired by him, and decided to take on his own goblin persona, who basically just was not subtle. He's literally just a rocker. His glider is a guitar. He wears makeup. He's basically the Green Goblin if he was a hipster, basically. So yeah, they're here. Basically, they're here for. So, like I said, they're here for the same reasons the other Gwens are. And sure enough, they end up arriving to the Oztech Expo themselves. And so, except they're hiding in the backstage, while the Gwens are hiding or waiting in the crowd. And sure enough, we see Norman Osborn and Howard Stark as they decide to present their newest technological innovation, so to speak. And of course, this is meant to be the finale of this is meant to be the culmination of the promise that Howard made to Norman 30 years prior, as well, we get the introduction of Iron Gwen, which, yeah, before you say, well, isn't her name Tony? Well, the thing is, Gwen actually isn't. The suit's actually called the Iron Gwen suit, as the Gwen part of the costume actually stands for, and I'm gonna find it. It stands for Guardian Wear Exo Network, or Gwen for short. And so as such, yeah, her official name is really just Iron Gwen because that's the name of the suit. So I kind of find that funny. And yeah, basically Iron Gwen exemplifies the part of Gwen Stacy that's a massive nerd, as she and Howard apparently modeled the suit after, anime and manga, so to speak. So yeah, Gwen's a little embarrassed by this, and she kind of wants to get her armored counterpart as quickly as possible, but it's at this point when the supervillains make their move, as one of Black 13's powers is that she can control luck. Think Domino from X-Men, except more amped up. And so basically, during a demonstration of the suit's weapons capabilities, she causes the suit to malfunction and just start misfiring all over the place into the crowd. Thankfully, the Gwens are able to take it while the crowd disperses, but basically at that point the Iron Gwen suit just kind of fails, so Tony is kind of dead in the water. Thankfully the other Gwens are there to help her out, but that's when the supervillains show up to try and kill Iron Gwen. As such, the four Gwens in the crowd decide to start coordinating, with Cap Gwen and Thor Gwen going to fight Black 13, while Wolverine Gwen and Spider-Gwen try and help the civilians and take care of the Glam Goblin. And to be fair, I do like seeing them coordinate like this, as when they're not bickering, you have to remember they are still the same person, so it is kind of cool seeing them be able to adapt to each other and kind of work off each other's methods when they actually do have a common goal that they're all aiming for. But either way, yeah, Thor Gwen and Cap Gwen go after Black 13, and while she's able to at first both of them end up throwing their respective weapons at her, Cap the shield, Thor Mjolnir, but likewise Black 13 is able to use her powers to redirect them to try and hit both Gwens, but while Thor Gwen gets knocked out by Cap's shield, well, Cap Gwen just grabs Mjolnir, and as we saw with Spider-Gwen, because they're still technically the same person, she's just as worthy to wield it as Thor Gwen is, and so she takes Mjolnir and then just uses it to smack Black 13 upside the head, knocking her out. In the meantime, Wolverine Gwen ends up going to Howard, Norman, and Tony, while Spider-Gwen dukes it out with the Glam Goblin, and basically she just tells them to hit the road, they've got to run. And of course, Howard doesn't exactly want to go, because he wants an explanation as to what the hell is going on, but Wolverine Gwen is kind of running on a short fuse here, and just kind of tells them, get out before I make you get out, even unsheathing one of her claws. Unfortunately, though, this was a bad call, considering that one of these men is someone that she wound up mortally injuring 30 years prior. And yeah, basically, Norman Osborn, he didn't get blinded, but the claw did get him right in the forehead and did nearly kill him. And as a result, the instant he sees Wolverine Gwen, the memories come back to Norman, and he begins changing. Specifically, his skin turns scaly and he gets bigger, and he starts resembling a goblin. Yep, Norman Osborn in this timeline became the Green Goblin anyway. Only, as he states, he didn't get his powers through technological means or by experimenting on himself or changing his genetic structure. No, he got his powers by eating a goblin. I'm not even kidding. In his own words, as he exposits, when he got stabbed in the head like he did, it wound up opening a third eye, so to speak, and allowed him to see things beyond our understanding and our mortal ken. And he wound up finding a goblin. He tried taking advantage of, basically, he began following the goblin and tried taking advantage of its capabilities to, build himself up more, make his technological achievements look good compared to Howard's. And yet, no matter what he did, Howard would always favor his daughter's accomplishments over his, and so as a result, he just got more and more desperate, till one day he decided, fuck it, I'll just take the goblin itself, and he ate it, transforming him into the Green Goblin. And basically, what's triggering the transformation here is the PTSD from seeing Wolverine-Gwen again, and so Norman decides he's got to get the hell out of there, even grabbing Iron Gwen in the process. Of course, back with the Spider-Gwen, she's duking it out with the Glam Goblin, and for the most part, she's doing well. But this is where I have to remind you that the source of Spider-Gwen's powers is her suit, as she's bonded with a symbiote. And the thing is, that guitar the Glam Goblin rides on, it ain't just for show, as he immediately strums it, and the loud noise not only gives him the strength to break free from Spider-Gwen's webs, but also causes her suit to go nuts as it can't take the loud noise, so she ends up falling to the ground while her suit tries recuperating. In the meantime, though, when Norman is freaking out and after Norman freaked out and grabbed Iron Gwen, he pretty much told the Glam Goblin to get them out of there, and the Glam Goblin, who like I said already idolizes Norman, decides, okay, I'll listen to you, and so he takes him, and so they end up they take off with Gwen trying to convince Norman that they need to go back, that things can be okay, but he says that no, those women back there are dangerous, we can't let them get anywhere near us. But it's at this point when the Gwens finally end up showing up, and hold on one second. Sorry, needed to reconfirm something in the plot. But yeah, the Gwens end up showing up, specifically with Thor chucking Wolverine-Gwen at the Glam Goblin's glider, and basically gets knocked out of the sky. Causing both goblins and Iron Gwen to fall to the earth. Thankfully, Iron Gwen, while freaking out at first, does end up recognizing these four women as herself, as they all have her same face. But the Glam Goblin takes advantage of this, as while he's on the ground disoriented, he tells Norman that, see, she was against you from the very beginning. Actually, look at her. And it's here where Norman's PTSD hits overdrive as he realizes something. Tony is a dead ringer for Wolverine-Gwen. And as a result, yeah, Norman's previous admiration for Tony turns to hatred as he charges at her with the intent of killing her, as after all, Howard made the suit for him, and now she's stealing it! Basically, he's just off of his rocker. However, it's at this point when the Iron Gwen suit finally comes back online after what Black 13 did to it, but unfortunately, she doesn't want to do anything to Norman, as he's a close family friend, and she cares about him, but he means to clearly do her harm, and so as the suit keeps telling her that the weapon systems are ready and the structural integrity is breaking down, sadly, Tony has no other choice, as she turns on the electropulses and fries Norman, which does get him off her, but also kills him. And it's at that point when Howard comes back, and I should probably mention that when Norman got fried, he reverted back to his human form. So yeah, Howard Stark just watched his daughter kill his best friend. Yeah, this is gonna be one hell of a session for his therapist. But yeah, with Howard essentially begins damning his daughter, and Tony, with really nowhere to go, ends up joining her other Gwen Stacy counterparts as they all go back to Loom World. Though it's clear that this is a hollow victory, as yeah, they beat the bad guys, but Tony lost her family in the worst way possible, which I'll get back to this line of thought when I get to my thoughts on the comic, but it isn't exactly fun. And to make matters worse, Gwen was able to recognize certain threads from when they were back there, as after all, the only reason Norman Osborn became the Green Goblin in the 80s was because of what the Gwens did 30 years prior relative to him. Basically, In her own words, the threads they set back in that time are what led to the events that they just saw. It's because Howard made a promise to Norman that he and Tony began developing the Iron Gwen suit. It's because of the injury Norman sustained that he became the Green Goblin in that time period. So Gwen begins wondering if in their attempts to try and undo everything and put the timeline back to normal, if they're actually making things worse. And to kind of affirm this, we then cut back to the 80s as we see that someone was watching the battle with the Green Goblin. And that someone was the Kree Empire, who, when seeing Norman Osborn shifting between his human and goblin forms, they begin assuming that somehow, in some way, the Skrulls have invaded Earth, and the Supreme Intelligence believes they might need to send an agent down to keep an eye on things. Of course, the question is raised, what agent will they send? Well, the Supreme Intelligence has an ideal candidate, as it turns out that it was around this time in the Earth 65 continuity when the original Captain Marvel, died. And while he may have been a traitorous scum of a Kree, his genes were perfect. And basically, while they may not like him as a person, if they could use that strength in benefit to them, it could very much help them in the long run. So they decide that they're going to take Marvel's genes and make a clone of him. But the question is still raised, what are they going to do? How are they going to make the clone blend in? And that's where we see the beginnings of the 5th Gwen Stacy template, because after all, we do know we do know who the final hero is. And sure enough, the Great Intelligence, after viewing the images of the Gwens in battle, tells his scientists to make the clone in the image of Spider-Gwen. And the final panel of the comic well, it shows us the final Gwen of the story as we see the newly created Captain Marvel Gwen fly off to Earth, an unknowing agent of the Kree Empire. So, there we go. Alright, so, my thoughts on this comic. Again, it's good. It's pretty good. I like that the comic begins, in this comic, it begins kind of addressing some of the criticisms that I've had in previous issues. It doesn't, completely patch things up and resolve everything oh no, everything's fine now. It doesn't really showcase that, but I like that they at least touch on them. It's not in the way that I hoped that they would, because there are some things about it that they don't really get into, which I'll talk about, but I like that they're at least bringing them up. Like how with Wolverine, Gwen asks her Spider-Gwen counterpart, why the hell don't you just kill us if we're screwing with time like this? Which, yeah, that's a valid point. If the Gwens themselves are the problem, then shouldn't they just, get rid of them? Of course the heroes are not, of course Spider-Gwen's not gonna do that. She's a superhero, for crying out loud, and these women didn't choose how they were created. These women did not choose to come into creation the way they did, and none of them are bad people. Even if they weren't, that's not right to just kill them because of all that shit. They have lives after all, so why should they kill them? So I do like that they bring that issue up, and something that I like is at the end of the comic, they do address the whole thing with the Gwens being pulled out of time. Because, like I said, by accepting this mission and joining Spider-Gwen in her attempt to, fix her universe and restore her original timeline, they're saying goodbye to everything that they ever knew, everyone they ever cared about, all their lives, everything that they've done, and up in their own respective times, they're just pretty much just waving goodbye to, because in order for this mission to be successful, they have to be taken out of time. But the thing is, that means just saying goodbye to everything they knew and loved. So it still kind of raises. So I do like that they acknowledge that such a mission is not an easy one to undertake. It's just that for me, I wish they still examined this issue prior. I love that they're touching on it. I really do. It's actually nice that they start acknowledging that there are serious stakes. That there are serious stakes for each of the Gwens personally. As like I said, since they're being pulled out of their lives, they essentially are being told you can't go back to what you knew. But I still wish that they kind of got into it more. Like, if we actually saw the mindsets of each Gwen and how they interpret this. We get that a little bit with Wolverine Gwen, when she questions her Spider-Gwen counterpart, hey, why don't you just kill us? But we don't really discuss it at length. How do any of the other Gwens feel about this? How are some of them okay with it? Are some of them willing to make the sacrifice? Are some of them indignant towards it? Are some of them begrudging because of it? We don't know. I personally would like it if we got more into that. Like, let's go into Thor Gwen, for example. I get the feel like how would she react to learning all of this? I get the sense that she'd be fine with it because her big deal is that she's showing off her might as Thor, and she basically just loves attention. She loves showing off all the power she's got, and the thing is, she really didn't have that much love lost for the time period she was in, aside from the admiration she had. And part of the reason she ditched her time period was because Gwen showed her the wonders of modern technology, and she was like, holy shit, that looks cool! I want to be with you! So, yeah, that was a very petty reason, but at the very least, it showcases that she, at the very least, wouldn't be too concerned about leaving her old life behind, because, well, she clearly didn't have high praise for it anyway. But what about characters like Cap Gwen or Wolverine Gwen? Maybe in the case of Wolverine Gwen, she'd be okay with it because she already was a woman out of time. As after all, if she's anything like the main universe Wolverine, that she's probably lived for hundreds of years, and odds are she's seen a lot of shit. She's already a tough girl. She did the things she did because she wanted to call Captain America Gwen out and wanted to challenge her. So, in a sense, she might not care, but then you get to Cap Gwen. How is she okay with all this? And the thing is, I know that she's a Captain America, and Captain Americas tend to be one of the most selfless superheroes in the Marvel Universe. They always think of other people before them, and they're always willing to make the biggest sacrifices for the greater good. After all, that's why a good chunk of them end up getting frozen in ice, because ultimately the accident that leads to them getting frozen in ice and taken out of time is because, well, there was no other option, and they had to do that. So, at the very least, we know that she'd be willing to make the sacrifice, but is she okay making this sacrifice? Like, she seemed very casual about this whole thing when Spider-Gwen and Thor-Gwen told her about it, but how does she feel about it personally? Even if she's willing to let herself be taken out of time, well, how does she feel? Because even other Captain Americas have pretty much have showcased that while they're willing to make the sacrifices necessary for the greater good, they still had connections. Connections that they lost by making those sacrifices. And while they are still okay with doing the things they do for the greater good of others, they also have regrets, things they leave behind, things that they would love to go back to if they had the chance. So, what about Cap Gwen? What life did she have? And I know she grew up in an orphanage, but she still had a life. She was still a famous superhero. She signed autographs, for God's sake. She was famous enough that they made a pinup calendar of her. So, did she just have no connections? I would love to learn more about these. I would love to learn more about that. And that's something that I think we should have expanded more in the book. Because, again, it's clear that these Gwens are fully aware of what the end goal here is. They know that they were created as part of a whole thing, as a whole experiment that essentially reincarnated Spider-Gwen across time. So they all know that their lives are the end result of a science experiment, especially since they now know Finale is hunting them across time in order to get her lives back. But how are each of them interpreting it? How are each of them okay with making the sacrifices that they are? Again, we can assume things about them based on what kind of characters they are and how they live. Like I said, Thor Gwen loves attention, so she probably doesn't care where she gets it. Wolverine Gwen's lived hundreds of years and she probably has no friends, so even if she was taken out of time, she'd probably be like, no shit, I'll just do whatever I can. But then if Cap Gwen, well, Captain Americas are selfless. She'd probably be willing to make the sacrifice. But again, those are only assumptions. We don't know much about what they actually feel about this whole thing. How they feel about leaving their lives behind and being pulled onto Loom World and being told, you gotta find your other selves and you gotta fix the main timeline so that it goes back to the way it was. So how would they interpret that? I would have loved to see more of that. See more of how each Gwen reacts to this news. How each of them is kind of working their way around it, how they can try and justify doing this, making this sacrifice, which I know they're superheroes, and superheroes are supposed to fight for the greater good, so to speak, but superheroes are still people. People have lives, people have loved ones, people have connections. And again, like I said, we can assume things about each hero because of this, but I would still like to learn more about these Gwens and how they justify this mission in their heads. I would love to see that. And the fact that the comic does not do that and just kind of touches on it briefly, it's annoying, to say the least. I don't hate it, because at the very least I do like that it's still acknowledged, but I just wish it had been expanded on more. I'm kind of, the best way to showcase it, let's look at Iron Gwen. We can easily tell what her life was like from just a glance. She was adopted by Howard Stark and taken under his wing. They worked together intimately for years and probably helped each other design the Iron Gwen armor. And on top of that, because in this new timeline, Norman Osborn was Howard Stark's best friend, he was essentially a close ally as well. So much so that when Norman Osborn freaked out, he pretty much took Iron Gwen because he thought he had to protect her. So it's clear that she had a happy life here. And what makes it even better, when the Iron Gwen armor started malfunctioning, Howard did not immediately blame Tony. He had actually started thinking Norman was responsible because, again, Howard listened more to Tony's ideas than Norman's. So he began thinking that maybe that was the case. Of course, it's still out of nowhere, and Norman was not responsible, but still. So at the very least, it's clear that that Tony Stacy did have a life here, and that she had connections. But the thing that made her inclined to join the other Gwen Stacy's, or the other Gwens, and essentially step out of time and leave her life behind, was the fact that her life crumbled around her in one single night. On the day that her and her dad's her dad and her dad's best friend's company was supposed to show off their greatest achievement, the Iron Gwen armor, something that they could sell and commercialize and would revolutionize weapons technology across the world. Well, things immediately went wrong. The tech malfunctioned. The convention center was attacked by supervillains. Her father's best friend turned into a monster and fucking kidnapped her. And then after she got saved from this kidnapping by these ladies that all look exactly like her, immediately Norman freaks out and tries to kill her because he sees the resemblance, and as a result she has to kill him. And it's a choice she clearly doesn't want to make, because she clearly cares about this guy, but he's giving her no choice. And after she kills him, Howard arrives on the scene and essentially just disowns her because of what he's seeing. Of course, it's tragic. You can actually feel the tragedy in the comic as Iron Gwen's life just crumbles around her. Everything that she held on to and held dear is gone, and she has nothing. So of course you commit. So I like seeing, and it's good drama. It's sad, it's tragic, it's poetic, and it essentially just gives you the impression of what the Gwens are losing by taking part in this mission. All of them lose their lives, and we see that showcased here with Iron Gwen, as because of the intervention of the Gwens and Finale's Terminal 6, everything went to hell. Everything she had built, all the connections she made, gone. And as a result, she's now alone. The only people she can rely on are these ladies, and the only thing they can really tell her is that we have to take you out of time because everything's messed up, and we're all kind of responsible. That's essentially like a nice punch in the gut right there, as it's just telling you that essentially your life was doomed from the start. You were never meant to exist, so all this tragedy was for nothing. That's gonna hurt in the long run. So it's good character drama. And in that sense, it does showcase the loss that Iron Gwen has made by joining up with her counterparts. But at the very least, I would have liked to have seen that more with the other Gwens. Showcase their own mindsets and so forth. Showcase their own mindsets and how they are okay and how they are with doing all this stuff. So again, I like that it's touched on, and I like how it's showcased with Iron Gwen, but I would have liked to have seen it expanded on more. So again, I probably got off topic there, but my point is this. The point is this. I do like Iron Gwen's drama, and I just wish that we had gotten that more with the other Gwen. So There you go. With that said, again, the story itself still moves at a fine pace, and I am still liking seeing the variants on all the Gwens. I do kind of like the unique thing they do with Iron Gwen in this comic, as in that same sense that they try and give each of the Gwens appropriate lives appropriate to their main universe counterparts of these heroes. All of them do have variants on their names, like Captain America Gwen changed her last name to Rogers when she took on the Captain America mantle. Wolverine Gwen is named Gwen Howlett, as Wolverine's real name is James Howlett. So I like that, and I like that because Iron Gwen's name is the Iron Gwen name is actually the name of the suit. The lady that we see inside it is not named Gwen. Her name is actually Tony. Tony Stacy, yes, but still Tony. Of course, it's spelled with an I, but still, it's pronounced the same way, so what do I care? So I like that, so I kind of like seeing the variation on that. Sadly, a consequence of how the story is, of showcases that we don't really get a sense of Tony's character in the story, aside from what's told to us, we learn, oh, she's a genius, she helped Howard develop the Iron Gwen armor, and likewise, apparently, she's a fan of manga and anime, which, again, I wish we could have seen more of that with her, as apparently the anime she's referencing is one that I have never heard about before, but otherwise, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of her character. As I would have liked to see more of her character, as at least in the previous two issues, we actually did see the Gwens briefly and see how they are in their environments and saw them as characters before Spider-Gwen met up with them and recruited them to her cause. So I would have liked to have seen more of that at least with Iron Gwen. But again, the whole environment is still cool. And again, like I said, I love the action scenes are even better too. As I'm liking seeing the Gwens coordinate better, showcasing them fighting side by side, actually working with each other's strengths and essentially being able to actually use those strengths to actually cover each other's weaknesses, so to speak. When Captain America Gwen and Thor Gwen went to go battle Black 13, Cap Gwen was able to adapt to the situation and even noted, okay, if she's me, I can use this hammer too, and use that to essentially outmaneuver Black 13's luck powers. I liked that when they were chasing after the goblins and Iron Gwen, Wolverine Gwen was able to get Thor to just chuck her at them so she could come in and knock them out of the sky. I like seeing the Gwens coordinate when battling the supervillains. It's good stuff. I like it. And I like that despite the fact that the Gwens do continually bicker because of their different demeanors and personalities, they're at the very least, they are learning to be a team. And I do at least like that, as, well, you can't have a verse theme event without having the characters working alongside each other. So it is still nice to see all of the Gwens finding ways to essentially get past their differences and, find each other's strengths and work together in the best way possible. It's all good stuff, and I'm still digging it. And likewise, another thing I do enjoy, the thing that Gwen mentioned, I like that the comic is showcasing that, whether intentional or not, the Gwens are the ones that are changing history. And I don't mean that they're changing history just by being there. It's by attempting to kind of knock the dents out of place and get the timeline back in order, that they're causing even more dents. As the events of last issue are what led to the events of this one. Howard Stark and Tony Stacy would not have developed the Iron Gwen armor if what happened at the party did not happen, as Howard made a promise to Norman to make him a proper suit of armor because of the injury he sustained from Wolverine Gwen when they were kids. And likewise, that's what led to the Iron Gwen armor coming into creation at all, which that was going to happen anyway, but I like that it was essentially worked into the history like that. And then likewise, Norman Osborn becoming the Green Goblin was also a direct consequence of that night. And as we see at the end of this issue, because the Gwens were in the area at all, and because of what happened with Norman, we see the creation of the 5th Gwen template as the Kree decide, okay, there's clearly something going on Earth. We need an agent in there to keep an eye on things, and so they make a new Captain Marvel, one who is modeled specifically on Gwen. I like that. I like seeing that because it helps really give a sense of, are the Gwens doing the right thing here? because essentially, the more they try and put everything back into place, the more they actually start making things happen. Like I said, it was because of the events of the party that led to the Iron Gwen suit being created. It's because the Gwens interfered at all that resulted in Norman Osborn. It's because, as a consequence of that, Norman became the Goblin. And basically because of the intervention at all is what led to the Krieg. Again, my point is, basically, everything is leading into everything else. And it really does raise the question of if whether the Gwens are doing the right thing at all. If their attempts to try and fix everything are instead actualizing it into reality. As Spider-Zero mentioned, the threads of Gwen's timeline are still tangled up, and they're not getting undone. They're not being fixed by their actions. If anything, it's by going back in time and trying to untangle them that they're just making the strands tighter. I like that. It really gives a sense of dread as the story goes along, and it really keeps you on edge, to makes you wonder if things are actually going to work out, or if ultimately Gwen is cementing the future that she saw. I like it. It's good. And I guess if I can bring it up again, I do like that we get to learn a bit more about Finale's backstory. It's a bit conceited of a backstory, but again, it kind of fits considering her personality and her character. That essentially she grew up in poverty and she just wanted more. She didn't have an unhappy childhood, but growing up the way she did and seeing that everything her mother did was essentially going to be forgotten and lost to the ages, it starts making her think, no, I don't want to be that. I want to be something bigger. And it's what led her to becoming an artist, an influencer. It's what led her to making all the millions she did because she wanted to leave an impression. And then finally, when it kind of hit her how final everything truly is, she decided, fuck it, I'm not going to be forgotten. If only the superheroes are going to be remembered, then I'm going to make sure I'm all the superheroes. And so that's what led her to wanting to develop the Finalizer. Again, it's interesting. Again, I like that. And in a way, it's understandable. It's a shallow backstory, I won't deny it. It's essentially everything she's doing is for is just for attention. That is literally the crux of her supervillain arc. She's doing everything she's doing because she just wants attention. That is all. But again, considering her backstory, I think it works for the most part. It's not a complex backstory, but I think it's a good one that does at least explain her actions. So I dig it, and I still am liking Finale. But either way, like I said, the issue so far actually is still pretty good or decent. So on the whole, I'm still enjoying the story. It's not great, of course. It still is rife with all the issues that I have, but there are still a lot of nuggets in there that keep me invested in the story and do make me want to keep reading. So on the whole, it's still decent. It's still a decent comic. So yeah, I think that's really all I have to say. Alright, thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson. I hope to see you on Thursday as we look at issue 4 and see the introduction of Captain Marvel Gwen. So till then, hope you have a good Tuesday and take care.